Jake Mitchell's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of his Peterbilt 579, the 18-wheeler's engine humming steadily as he navigated the pre-dawn highways outside Phoenix. The desert air was cool, carrying the faint scent of creosote and sage through his partially open window. At 38, Jake had traded the weight of an M4 carbine for the responsibility of 80,000 pounds of cargo, but his eyes still held the sharp vigilance of a special reconnaissance operator. The dashboard clock read 4:47 a.m., exactly on schedule. Jake had been driving this route for 3 years now, Phoenix to Houston, sometimes continuing to Atlanta when the cargo demanded it. The long hours suited him, less interaction, more time to process the memories that still visited him in quiet moments. His reflection in the side mirror revealed a face weathered beyond its years, marked by fine lines from squinting against Afghan sun and desert winds. The gray creeping into his dark hair had started during his third deployment, accelerated after Kandahar. He reached for his thermos of black coffee, strong and bitter as the lessons learned in his 15 years of service. The Army had taught him many things, but perhaps the most valuable was how to disappear in plain sight. After his discharge, Jake had deliberately chosen a profession that kept him moving, anonymous, just another face in the endless stream of truckers crisscrossing America's highways. But old habits died hard. Before every trip, Jake performed the same ritual he'd once done before missions. A thorough inspection of his vehicle, checking for signs of tampering or surveillance devices. He mapped alternative routes, identified potential ambush points, and memorized the locations of every hospital, police station, and military installation along his path. What other truckers saw as paranoia, Jake recognized as basic operational security. His Peterbilt wasn't just a truck, it was his mobile command center. Hidden compartments contained emergency supplies, medical kits rated for trauma care, and communications equipment that went far beyond the standard CB radio. Jake maintained the vehicle with military precision, knowing that mechanical failure at the wrong moment could be as deadly as enemy fire. The cab was Spartan, organized, everything in its designated place. The cargo today was electronics, high-end computer components bound for a tech company in Houston. The manifest listed the value at $2.3 million, enough to make any hijacker interested. Jake had noticed the uptick in criminal activity along the southern routes, particularly near the border. The cartels had grown bolder, more sophisticated. Their tactics reminded him of insurgent operations he'd observed in Afghanistan: patient surveillance, coordinated strikes, rapid extraction. As the sun began to rise, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold, Jake's thoughts drifted to his former life. Special reconnaissance wasn't like other special operations roles. While others kicked in doors and engaged targets directly, SR operators were ghosts. They infiltrated deep behind enemy lines, established observation posts, gathered intelligence, and guided precision strikes. Jake had spent weeks at a time in hide sites, watching, waiting, becoming part of the landscape. Those skills had served him well in Afghanistan's Hindu Kush Mountains, where he'd led a 6-man team specializing in high-risk surveillance operations. They tracked Taliban leadership, mapped supply routes, and provided real-time intelligence for special operations raids. His team had been family, brothers bound by shared danger and absolute trust. The memory of that final mission in Kandahar still haunted him. What should have been routine surveillance had turned into a complex ambush. Jake had survived, but Martinez and Cooper hadn't made it home. The guilt rode with him like an unwelcome passenger, especially during these long, solitary drives. He adjusted his mirrors, a habit ingrained from years of counter-surveillance training. Jake had noticed patterns lately, the same vehicles appearing at truck stops, unfamiliar faces asking too many questions about routes and schedules. His instincts, honed by years of operating in hostile territory, were sending warnings. The radio crackled with trucker chatter, weather reports, traffic updates, the usual banter. But Jake heard something else in the static, a pattern his trained ear recognized. Someone was monitoring the channel, breaking squelch in a rhythm that spoke of professional communication discipline. He'd heard similar patterns in the mountains of Afghanistan, when enemy forces coordinated movements. Jake reached under his seat, fingers brushing against the Glock 19 secured in its concealed holster. He had a permit for it, along with the AR-15 pistol locked in a hidden compartment. The weapons were tools, nothing more, insurance against the dangers that prowled America's highways. He'd seen enough violence to last several lifetimes and had no desire to see more, but he'd learned the hard way that evil rarely announced its intentions. His phone buzzed with a message from his dispatcher. "Heads up, Jake. Reports of increased cartel activity along your route. Border Patrol issued an advisory. Stay alert." Jake had already mapped an alternate route that avoided the most dangerous sections of Highway 90, but sometimes the job required calculated risks. The company was counting on this delivery, and Jake had never failed to complete a mission, in the Army or in civilian life. As he drove, Jake reflected on how he'd ended up here. After his medical discharge, not for physical wounds, but for the invisible scars that kept him awake at night, he'd struggled to find his place in civilian society. Office jobs felt suffocating. Security consulting brought him too close to the violence he was trying to leave behind. Trucking offered the perfect balance: solitude, purpose, and just enough risk to keep his skills sharp. Other drivers had nicknamed him Ghost for his ability to spot trouble before it materialized. He'd helped several avoid hijacking attempts, guided others through dangerous weather, and once talked a rookie through a mechanical failure that could have been catastrophic. The trucking community had its own code, its own brotherhood. It wasn't the same as his SR team, but it filled part of the void. Jake's training kicked in as he noticed a pattern in his mirrors. 3 vehicles, 2 SUVs and a pickup truck, had been maintaining perfect surveillance positions for the last 30 miles. They were rotating their positions professionally, staying just far enough back to avoid suspicion while keeping his truck in sight. Most drivers wouldn't have noticed, but Jake had spent years teaching others how to conduct mobile surveillance. He keyed his CB radio, speaking in the casual code truckers used. "Breaker 19, this is Ghost Driver. Anyone else seeing heavy bear activity around mile marker 225? The response came back negative. No police reported in the area. Which meant the vehicles following him weren't law enforcement. Jake's mind shifted into operational mode, analyzing threats and planning contingencies. His cargo was valuable enough to attract sophisticated criminals. The surveillance pattern suggested training, discipline, and coordination, hallmarks of cartel operations. He'd studied their tactics, noting how former Mexican Special Forces soldiers had brought military precision to criminal enterprises. The landscape was changing as he approached the more desolate stretches of highway. Cellular coverage would be spotty, help far away. Jake had operated in similar terrain before, where isolation could be either an advantage or a death sentence. He began implementing counter-surveillance techniques, subtle speed changes, unexpected lane shifts, anything to confirm his suspicions without alerting his pursuers. His hands remained steady on the wheel, breathing controlled, senses heightened. This was the state he'd lived in for years overseas, alert but not anxious, prepared but not paranoid. The familiar clarity was almost welcome after months of fighting formless nightmares. Here was a tangible threat, something he could assess, plan for, potentially neutralize. Jake thought about the other drivers who'd gone missing on this route, 5 in the last 6 months. The authorities suspected cartel involvement, but had no solid leads. The victims were chosen carefully, their cargo valuable but not valuable enough to trigger massive law enforcement response. It was the same patient, calculated approach he'd seen from insurgent cells in Afghanistan. As the sun climbed higher, Jake noticed the surveillance vehicles adjusting their positions. They were good, but not good enough to fool someone who'd spent years evading Taliban spotters. He reached for his encrypted satellite phone, another habit from his military days. The emergency beacon was armed, ready to transmit his location to authorities if needed. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful in its desolation. Jake had always found peace in empty spaces, where threats could be seen coming from miles away. But he knew this emptiness was deceptive. The cartels owned these borderlands as surely as the Taliban had owned their mountain strongholds. His fingers drummed briefly on the steering wheel as he considered his options. He could try to outrun them, but his fully loaded truck wasn't built for speed. He could call for help, but response time would be measured in hours, not minutes. Or he could continue as if unaware, gathering intelligence while they revealed their intentions. Jake chose the third option, the SR way. Watch, wait, analyze. Let the enemy commit first, reveal their strength and disposition. Then strike with precision when the advantage was yours. It was a game he'd played countless times in the shadows of foreign lands. Now he would play it on American soil. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the highway as Jake Mitchell, former ghost in the mountains of Afghanistan, prepared to become invisible once again. The hunters thought they were closing in on easy prey. They had no idea they were about to face something far more dangerous than a simple truck driver. The chess match had begun, and Jake intended to control the board. His cargo would reach Houston on schedule. The only question was how many obstacles he'd have to remove along the way. As his instructor had drummed into him years ago, in reconnaissance, patience isn't just a virtue, it's a weapon. Jake took another sip of coffee and smiled grimly. The cartels were about to learn why you never corner a ghost. The truck stop outside Gila Bend had been Jake's first warning. 3 hours earlier, he'd pulled in for fuel and a quick meal, maintaining the appearance of a routine stop while his trained eyes catalogued every detail. The place was nearly empty, unusual for this time of morning when drivers typically clustered for breakfast and coffee. 2 of the SUVs he'd later see in his mirrors were already there, parked at opposite ends of the lot with clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. Jake had noted the men inside, too alert, too fit, their casual clothes failing to hide the telltale bulges of concealed weapons. They'd watched him without seeming to, their conversation stopping when he entered the diner, resuming with forced casualness once he sat down. Classic surveillance behavior, competent but not quite professional enough to fool someone who'd spent years identifying watchers in hostile territory. Now, 3 hours and 180 miles later, those same vehicles had been joined by others. Jake's mirrors revealed a carefully orchestrated surveillance pattern, 3 vehicles rotating positions every 10 to 15 minutes, maintaining what they thought was a discrete distance. They were using the floating box technique, 1 vehicle ahead as a spotter, 1 directly behind, and 1 hanging back as reserve. It was textbook mobile surveillance, the kind taught in military and law enforcement academies. The CB radio crackled with routine chatter, but Jake's practiced ear detected something else. Every few minutes, a brief burst of static would interrupt the channel, not random interference, but deliberate breaks and squelch. Someone was using the channel for coded communication, clicking their mic in specific patterns. 3 clicks, pause, 2 clicks. Response, 2 clicks, pause for clicks. They were coordinating movement, probably preparing for something. Jake reached for his satellite phone and quickly texted his dispatcher. Probable surveillance. 3 vehicles minimum. Professional tactics. Continuing per schedule but staying alert. The response came quickly. Copy that. Border Patrol reports increased cartel activity your sector. 2 trucks hit yesterday near mile marker 312. Stay safe. Mile marker 312 was 40 minutes ahead, where Highway 90 narrowed through a series of curves bordered by steep embankments, a natural choke point perfect for an ambush. Jake had already identified it as a high-risk area during his route planning. If they were going to make their move, that would be the place. He keyed his CB again, adopting the casual tone of a bored trucker. Breaker 19, this is Ghost Driver looking for a bear report around the Devil's Backbone. Anyone got their ears on? The Devil's Backbone was trucker slang for that dangerous stretch of highway. Several voices responded. No police activity reported, but one driver mentioned seeing lots of four-wheelers playing games in the area earlier. Jake's dashboard clock read 9:23 a.m. The morning sun was climbing higher, eliminating the long shadows that could provide concealment. Temperature outside was already pushing 90 degrees, heat shimmer rising from the asphalt. He adjusted his air conditioning and performed a mental inventory of his resources: full fuel tank, plenty of water, medical supplies, weapons accessible but concealed, satellite phone charged, emergency beacon ready. The surveillance vehicles were getting bolder. The lead SUV had closed to within a quarter mile, while the trailing vehicle maintained a half-mile separation. They were tightening the box, preparing for action. Jake recognized the model, Chevrolet Suburbans, popular with both law enforcement and cartels for their size and capability. These were newer models, black or dark blue, with tinted windows and aftermarket additions that suggested armor upgrades. His radio picked up another pattern of clicks, followed by a brief transmission in Spanish, quickly cut off, as if someone had accidentally keyed their mic. Jake's Spanish was functional, improved by years of working with indigenous forces overseas. He caught two words: listo, ready, and pronto, soon. Time to raise the stakes. Jake gradually increased his speed from 65 to 70 miles per hour, watching how quickly the surveillance vehicles adjusted. They matched his speed change within seconds, too quickly for coincidence. He then dropped back to 60, and again they mirrored his movement. They were definitely locked onto him, no longer concerned about remaining undetected. As he approached mile marker 290, Jake noticed a new element in the pattern. A fourth vehicle, a modified pickup truck with oversized tires and a light bar, had appeared ahead, maintaining position about a mile in front. This wasn't surveillance anymore. They were setting up a rolling intercept. The truck ahead would slow down, forcing Jake to reduce speed, while the vehicles behind closed in to box him. Jake's mind shifted into combat planning mode. He began analyzing terrain, identifying escape routes, calculating response times. His truck was carrying 76,000 pounds gross weight, massive momentum but limited maneuverability. The Jake brake could help with rapid deceleration, but any sudden moves risked jackknifing the trailer. He'd need to be precise. The radio chatter had gone quiet, an ominous sign. Legitimate truckers always talked, sharing information about road conditions, speed traps, and weather. Silence meant everyone else had sensed danger and switched to alternate channels or gone radio dark entirely. Jake noticed his hands were steady on the wheel, his breathing controlled and even. The familiar pre-combat calm was settling over him, that peculiar state where time seemed to slow and every detail became crystal clear. He'd felt this same sensation countless times in Afghanistan, just before contact with enemy forces. His body remembered what his mind sometimes tried to forget. The lead pickup truck was beginning to slow, dropping from 70 to 65, then 60 miles per hour. Right on schedule. Jake maintained his speed, closing the distance slightly to gauge their reaction. The driver immediately accelerated back to 70. They wanted him at a specific distance, not too close, not too far. Classic ambush positioning. His secure phone buzzed with an automated alert from his company's tracking system. Warning: multiple vehicles detected in proximity. Possible boxing attempt. Emergency services notified. At least someone would know if things went sideways. Jake disabled the audible alerts to avoid distraction and focused on the developing situation. The Devil's Backbone was now 20 miles ahead. If they followed standard cartel tactics, they'd wait until he entered that confined stretch before making their move. But these operators seemed more sophisticated than usual. They might try something unexpected, a tire spike strip, a ramming maneuver, or even a staged accident to force him to stop. Jake had studied dozens of cartel hijacking reports, noting patterns and techniques. The most professional crews avoided gunfire when possible, preferring intimidation and overwhelming force to achieve quick surrender. Violence drew attention, left evidence, and risked damaging valuable cargo. But if resistance was met, they escalated rapidly and brutally. A new transmission broke through on the CB, this time in English with a slight accent. "Big truck approaching Devil's Backbone, you might want to consider taking a break. Weather's looking rough ahead." It wasn't a trucker's voice, too precise, too formal. Jake recognized it as a final warning, a chance to pull over voluntarily before they forced the issue. He keyed his mic. "Appreciate the heads up, but I'm on a schedule." Ghost driver pushing through. Let them know he'd heard the message but wasn't complying. Sometimes showing awareness and determination was enough to discourage amateur criminals. But these weren't amateurs. The response came immediately. "Your choice, friend. But storms in the desert can be expensive." The threat was clear now. Jake's cargo was worth millions, but more importantly, his truck itself was valuable. A late-model Peterbilt with low miles could fetch 6 figures on the black market. As mile marker 300 passed, Jake noticed the surveillance pattern changing again. The trailing SUV accelerated, closing to within 200 yards. Too close for normal highway spacing, clearly intended to intimidate. The lead pickup maintained position a half-mile ahead, while the second SUV moved into the left lane, preventing any passing attempts. Jake's training kicked into overdrive. He began implementing counter-surveillance driving techniques, subtle steering inputs to test their reaction times, minor speed variations to disrupt their spacing, positioning his truck to maximize his mirror's coverage while minimizing their sight lines into his cab. The satellite phone showed 3 bars, still good coverage, but it would drop to nothing in the Devil's Backbone where the canyon walls blocked signals. Jake quickly sent a pre-programmed message to his emergency contact list. Code yellow. Probable intercept attempt imminent. Location, Highway 90, approaching mile 310. 4 hostile vehicles confirmed. His dashboard camera was recording everything, the footage automatically uploaded to cloud storage every few minutes. If something happened to him, there would be evidence. Jake had installed the system himself, with multiple hidden cameras covering every angle, another lesson learned from investigating ambushes overseas. The morning heat was building, creating thermals that made the horizon shimmer and dance. In his mirrors, Jake could see the occupants of the trailing SUV more clearly now. 4 men, all wearing sunglasses and baseball caps, their posture alert and ready. The front passenger held something in his lap, probably a radio or weapon. 10 miles to the Devil's Backbone. Jake's mind ran through tactical options like a computer processing scenarios. He could try to ram through their block. His truck's mass gave him advantage in a collision. He could fake a breakdown, forcing them to approach on foot where his defensive position would be stronger. Or he could maintain course and let them commit first, preserving the element of surprise about his capabilities. The CB crackled again. "Ghost driver, last chance for that coffee break. Storm's about to hit hard." The voice carried a harder edge now, patience wearing thin. They were committed to their plan but still hoping to avoid the complexity and risk of a forced stop. Jake's response was to gradually increase speed to 72 miles per hour, just below the point where his company's governor would limit the engine. The message was clear: he wasn't stopping voluntarily. The trailing SUV immediately accelerated to match, now following at an unsafe distance. 5 miles to the backbone. The terrain was changing, flat desert giving way to rocky outcrops and deeper washes. The highway began a series of gentle curves, preparing for the sharper turns ahead. Traffic was non-existent, unusual but not surprising given the time and remote location. Or perhaps other drivers had received warnings to avoid this stretch. Jake's mirrors revealed increased activity in the vehicles. Men shifting position, checking equipment, preparing for action. The passenger in the lead pickup was now openly holding a radio, coordinating with the other vehicles. They'd abandoned any pretense of secrecy. 3 miles out, a new element appeared, another SUV emerging from a side road ahead, dust cloud marking its rapid acceleration onto the highway. 5 vehicles now. This was a major operation, well-funded and carefully planned. Jake wondered briefly what made his cargo valuable enough to warrant such resources, then dismissed the thought. The why didn't matter right now, only the how of surviving. The first curves of the Devil's Backbone appeared ahead, highway markers warning of reduced speed zones and sharp turns. The canyon walls rose on either side, red rock formations carved by ancient waters into a natural funnel that had claimed numerous vehicles over the years. In daylight, it was merely challenging. At night or in bad weather, it was treacherous. Jake downshifted smoothly, engine brake growling as the truck began its descent into the canyon. The surveillance vehicles adjusted their positions for the confined space, lead pickup extending its distance to navigate the curves, trailing SUVs closing even tighter. They were good, maintaining their box formation despite the challenging terrain. His secure phone lost signal as expected, the canyon walls blocking satellite coverage. For the next 8 miles, Jake would be completely on his own, no backup, no communication, no witnesses except his cameras. The isolation was absolute. The first sharp curve approached, a banking right-hand turn with a steep drop-off on the outside edge. Jake took the optimal line, keeping his speed steady at 45 miles per hour, fast enough to maintain momentum, slow enough to control if evasive action became necessary. His thousands of hours driving these roads gave him an edge his pursuers might not expect. As he exited the curve, Jake's trained eye caught movement in his peripheral vision. The lead pickup had suddenly braked hard, brake lights flaring bright in the morning sun. Simultaneously, his mirrors showed the trailing SUVs accelerating, closing the gap rapidly. The trap was springing. Jake's hands tightened imperceptibly on the wheel. After miles of patient surveillance, hours of careful positioning, the cartels were finally committing to their assault. The chess match was entering its critical phase. Every decision now would have immediate, potentially lethal consequences. The ghost driver was about to show them why some shadows have teeth. The lead pickup truck's brake lights flared like warning beacons as it skidded to a stop sideways across both lanes, completely blocking the narrow highway. Jake had less than 3 seconds to react. His years of combat driving kicked in. He downshifted hard, engaged the engine brake, and began the delicate dance of slowing 80,000 pounds of steel and cargo without jackknifing the trailer. The trailing SUVs surged forward, boxing him in from behind. In his mirrors, Jake could see armed men preparing to exit their vehicles, weapons at the ready. The canyon walls rose on both sides, eliminating any chance of evasive maneuvers. They'd chosen their ambush point perfectly, a section where the road narrowed to barely 2 lanes with sheer rock faces creating a natural kill zone. Jake brought the Peterbilt to a controlled stop 20 yards from the blocking vehicle. He kept the engine running, hands visible on the steering wheel, while his mind calculated angles, distances, and options. The morning sun reflected off rifle barrels as men emerged from the SUVs, 8 total, all carrying military-style weapons, moving with trained precision. Through his windshield, Jake watched as a 9th figure stepped out of the lead pickup. This one moved differently, economical, purposeful, with the bearing of command. The man was tall, lean, with weathered features partially hidden behind expensive sunglasses. He wore tactical clothing that looked military surplus but fit too well to be second-hand. A Heckler & Koch G36 rifle hung from a single-point sling across his chest, and his vest bristled with spare magazines. El Halcón, Jake murmured, recognizing the infamous cartel enforcer from intelligence briefings he still received from former military contacts. The Hawk, formerly Captain Miguel Herrera of the Mexican Special Forces Airmobile Group, disappeared 6 years ago, resurfaced as the Los Zetas cartel's primary enforcement officer. Responsible for at least 30 confirmed kills, specialized in high-value cargo interdiction. El Halcón gestured, and his men spread out in a classic tactical formation, overlapping fields of fire, no bunching up, maintaining cover behind their vehicles. These weren't street thugs. They were trained soldiers executing a military operation. Jake's respect for his opponents increased, even as his chances of survival decreased. A voice called out in accented English. "Driver! Exit the vehicle slowly! Hands where we can see them!" Jake took a deep breath, centered himself, and reached for the door handle. Every movement was deliberate, non-threatening. He'd been in situations like this before. Sometimes the best reconnaissance came from appearing helpless while gathering intelligence. He opened the door and climbed down from the cab, raising his hands to shoulder level. The desert heat hit him like a physical force after the air-conditioned cab. Dust devils danced at the edges of the road, and the morning sun cast harsh shadows in the canyon. Jake's boots crunched on loose gravel as he took 3 steps away from his truck, positioning himself where he could observe all the gunmen while keeping his back to the rock wall. El Halcón approached, rifle pointed casually downward but ready to snap up in an instant. His men maintained their positions, weapons trained. The leader stopped 10 feet away, studying Jake with professional interest. "You drive a long way from home, senor," El Halcón said, his English precise and educated. "Perhaps you are lost?" "Just making my delivery," Jake replied, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Houston by tomorrow morning." "Ah, but plans change." "You see, your cargo belongs to us now." "The keys, please." Jake hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant but not defiant. "In the ignition." "Look, I don't want any trouble." "Take what you want." El Halcón smiled without warmth. "Smart man. Rodriguez, check him for weapons." What of the gunman approached, young but competent, patting Jake down with practiced efficiency. He found Jake's wallet, cell phone, and the obvious Glock in its holster, but missed the ceramic blade in Jake's boot and the compact Sig Sauer P365 concealed in the small of his back under his untucked shirt. Jake had learned long ago that searchers often stopped after finding the first weapon, especially if you positioned it where they expected to find one. "Clean, Chief." "Just the Glock," Rodriguez reported, stepping back. "Keep your hands where we can see them," El Halcón ordered. He gestured to another man. "Martinez, get the manifest. Let's see what treasures we have today." As Martinez climbed into the cab to search for shipping documents, Jake's tea reigned. I was cataloging everything, the makes and models of their weapons, their positions, their levels of alertness, which ones seemed nervous and which were truly dangerous. He noted that 2 men near the rear SUV were speaking quietly in Spanish, their attention divided. Another was lighting a cigarette, his rifle slung carelessly. Small mistakes that could be exploited. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of gun oil and sweat. Jake's mind transported him momentarily to Afghanistan, a different desert, similar tension, the same pre-combat awareness where every detail mattered. He could feel the familiar calm settling over him, time seeming to slow as his senses sharpened. "Chief!" Martinez called from the cab. "Computer components. High-end processors, graphics cards. Maybe 2-3 million worth." El Halcón nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent. Worth the effort then. He turned back to Jake. You will help us transfer the cargo. Any problems, any delays, and things become unpleasant. There's a security system, Jake said, seeing an opportunity. GPS tracking, remote engine shutdown. If you don't enter the right codes in sequence, it alerts the company and the police. Alcon's eyes narrowed behind his sunglasses. Show us these codes. Jake started walking toward the cab, hands still raised. They're in a hidden compartment. Company security protocol. This was true, there was a hidden compartment. But it contained something far more useful than security codes. As he reached the driver's side, Jake pretended to stumble slightly on the running board, catching himself against the door frame. The movement looked natural but positioned him perfectly for what came next. The compartment release is under the seat, he explained, reaching inside. His fingers found the concealed switch that he'd installed himself. Instead of security codes, the compartment contained flashbang grenades and smoke canisters, part of his personal security measures. In one fluid motion, born from thousands of hours of combat training, Jake grabbed a flashbang, pulled the pin, and tossed it under the lead pickup while diving behind the cab door. The explosion was deafening in the narrow canyon. The flash temporarily blinded everyone looking in that direction. Jake was already moving, muscle memory taking over. He grabbed 2 smoke grenades from the compartment and threw them in opposite directions, creating instant chaos. Through the swirling smoke, he could hear shouting in Spanish, the sound of running feet, weapons being raised. Jake reached behind his back for the concealed Sig Sauer, the familiar grip fitting perfectly in his hand. Time to show these cartel soldiers what a Special Forces reconnaissance operator could do. The smoke was his element. In Afghanistan, he'd learned to navigate by sound and instinct when visibility dropped to 0. He moved swiftly around the front of his truck, using its mass for cover. Through gaps in the smoke, he caught glimpses of confused cartel members, their tactical discipline breaking down in the chaos. A figure emerged from the smoke to his left, Rodriguez, weapon raised but eyes still dazzled from the flash. Jake's training kicked in, 2 shots center mass, 1 to the head. The young Sicario dropped before he could fire. Jake was already moving, not waiting to confirm the kill. Automatic weapons fire erupted, bullets sparking off the truck's frame. Jake dropped low, using the massive front tire for cover. He could hear El Alcon shouting orders, trying to restore control. The cartel leader's voice placed him near the rear SUV, smart, using the vehicles for cover while his men advanced. Through the tactical scope of events, Jake's mind was calculating. 9 hostiles initially, 1 down. 8 remaining. Limited ammunition, 15 rounds in the SIG, plus 1 spare magazine. No room for wasted shots. The smoke would dissipate in minutes. He needed to even the odds before then. A burst of gunfire shattered the driver's side window above him. Jake rolled right, coming up in a tactical crouch. 2 Sicarios were advancing through the smoke, moving as a team. Good tactics, but they were looking for a panicked truck driver, not a trained operator. Jake fired 4 rounds in rapid succession. Both men went down. 6 left. The smoke was thinning. Jake needed to move. He sprinted along the passenger side of his truck, heading for the trailer. The canyon walls created echoes that confused direction, but Jake had learned to filter the sounds. Footsteps to his right, he spun, dropped to one knee, and fired twice. Another Sicario fell, his AK-47 clattering on the asphalt. El Alcon's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back! Regroup at the vehicles! Smart move. The cartel leader was adapting, trying to restore order. Jake couldn't let that happen. He reached the rear of his trailer just as the last of the smoke began to clear. In the sudden visibility, he found himself face-to-face with one of the cartel gunmen. Time seemed to freeze. The Sicario's eyes widened in surprise, He'd expected to be hunting, not confronted. His rifle was coming up, but Jake was faster. The SIG barked once, and the man crumpled. 4 hostiles remaining, including El Halcón. A rifle burst forced Jake back behind the trailer. The shots were disciplined, controlled, El Halcón himself. The cartel leader was covering his men's retreat to the vehicles. Jake risked a quick look around the corner, and saw them forming a defensive position behind the SUVs. "Impressive, senor!" El Halcón called out. "But you are outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and I promise a quick death." Jake checked his ammunition, 8 rounds left in the current magazine, plus 15 in the spare. Not enough for a prolonged firefight. He needed to be creative. His eyes fell on the trailer's rear doors. The electronic locks could be released from inside the cab, but there was also a manual override, a security feature he'd installed himself. If he could get the doors open, the cargo could provide additional cover or even a distraction. Moving carefully, Jake reached for the override lever. The mechanism clicked, and the heavy doors swung open. Inside, pallets of boxed electronics were secured with cargo straps. Not much cover, but the boxes might stop pistol rounds. An idea formed. Jake holstered the SIG and began climbing into the trailer. If he could get elevation. Gunfire erupted again, bullets punching through the trailer's aluminum skin. Jake dove behind a pallet, the boxes providing minimal protection. But now he was inside, with better cover and a height advantage. He moved deeper into the trailer, using the cargo for concealment. At the front, near the cab, was an emergency escape hatch in the roof, another modification he made. If he could reach it. "You only delay the inevitable," El Halcón shouted. "We have time." "You do not!" Jake knew the cartel leader was right. Eventually, they'd either flush him out or simply steal the truck with him inside. He needed to change the tactical situation dramatically. That's when he remembered the emergency road flares in the cab's safety kit, combined with the trailer's contents. Moving stealthily, Jake made his way to the front of the trailer. The connecting wall to the cab had an access panel, standard on many trucks for checking brake lines and electrical connections. Jake pried it open and reached through, feeling for the safety kit mounted under the passenger seat. His fingers closed on the cylindrical flares. Perfect. Electronic components were shipped in anti-static packaging filled with tiny foam pellets, essentially, industrial-grade packing peanuts. Highly flammable packing peanuts. Jake smiled grimly as he lit the first flare. He moved quickly through the trailer, cutting open boxes and scattering their contents. The foam pellets created a layer of combustible material across the trailer floor. Then he lit 2 more flares and tossed them into the mess. The effect was immediate. The foam ignited with a whoosh, creating a wall of flame and thick, acrid smoke. Jake was already climbing toward the roof hatch as the fire spread. The smoke would provide cover, and the fire would force the cartel fighters to make a choice: save the valuable cargo or continue the fight. Jake emerged onto the trailer roof as black smoke billowed around him. From his elevated position, he could see the cartel members breaking cover, shouting in alarm as they realized their prize was burning. El Halcón was screaming orders, pointing at the trailer. 3 sicarios ran toward the truck, presumably to try to save the cargo or put out the fire. Jake dropped 2 of them with carefully aimed shots before they reached the trailer. The third dove back behind cover. Only El Halcón and 1 other gunman remained combat effective. The odds were finally evening out. Jake climbed down the side of the trailer away from the cartel vehicles, using the smoke for concealment. He needed to end this quickly. The fire would attract attention, and legitimate first responders would be arriving soon. That would complicate everything. He circled wide, using the canyon wall for cover. His goal was to flank the cartel position, but El Halcón anticipated the move. Bullets sparked off the rock face inches from Jake's head, driving him back. "You fight well for a truck driver," El Alcone called out. "Perhaps we should have offered you a job instead." Jake didn't respond. He was busy calculating angles and distances. The cartel leader had taken position behind the engine block of the lead SUV, excellent cover against small arms fire. His remaining Sicario was crouched behind the rear wheel of the same vehicle. The trailer fire was spreading, black smoke rising into the morning sky. In the distance, Jake thought he could hear sirens, though it might have been his imagination. Either way, time was running out. He needed to force El Alcone out of cover. Jake remembered something from the cartel leader's file. Herrera had been court-martialed for excessive aggression during a hostage rescue operation. The man had a temper, a weakness that could be exploited. "Miguel Herrera!" Jake called out, using El Alcone's real name. "Captain Herrera of the Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales. Is this what you've become? A common thief?" The silence that followed was telling. Then El Alcone's voice, cold with fury. "You know nothing about me, gringo. I know you were one of Mexico's finest. Special forces, decorated for bravery. Now you're stealing electronics for drug dealers. You're men from the old unit. What would they think?" The psychological warfare worked. El Alcone rose from cover, his pride overcoming his tactical sense. "They are dead. Betrayed by a corrupt government that..." Jake's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second shot would have been fatal, but Jake's SIG clicked empty. In the heat of battle, he'd lost count of his rounds, a rookie mistake that could cost him everything. El Alcone, wounded but not down, raised his G-36. Jake dove sideways as bullets chewed up the ground where he'd been standing. He rolled behind a boulder, frantically ejecting the empty magazine and slamming in his spare. When he came up to fire again, El Alcone had retreated to cover. The remaining Sicario opened up with his AK-47, forcing Jake down. The situation had stalemated again, but now with the added pressure of approaching sirens and a spreading fire. "Chief, we need to go!" the Sicarios shouted. "The police, we finish this!" El Alcone snarled. But Jake could hear the doubt in the Sicario's voice, the calculation that the payoff wasn't worth capture or death. These men were mercenaries, not ideologues. When the cost became too high, they would cut their losses. Sure enough, Jake heard an engine start, one of the rear SUVs. The remaining Sicario was making his escape. El Alcone shouted curses in Spanish, but he was alone now, wounded, with authorities approaching. The cartel leader made his choice. He broke cover and sprinted for the lead SUV, firing his G-36 one-handed to cover his retreat. Jake stepped out from behind the boulder, took careful aim, and put 2 rounds through the SUV's engine block. The vehicle wouldn't be going anywhere. El Alcone spun around, his rifle coming up. Jake and the cartel leader fired simultaneously. Jake felt the bullet tug at his shirt as it passed. His own shots were better placed, one in El Alcone's thigh, the other in his weapon, sending the G-36 spinning away. The cartel leader fell to one knee, blood streaming from multiple wounds. He looked up at Jake, his sunglasses gone, revealing eyes that burned with hatred and something else, perhaps respect. "Who are you?" El Alcone gasped. Jake approached cautiously, weapon trained. "Just a truck driver trying to make a delivery." El Alcone laughed, a wet sound that suggested internal injuries. "No truck driver fights like that. Special forces?" "Something like that." Jake kicked the G-36 further away. "Former." The sirens were louder now, maybe 2 minutes out. The trailer fire had spread to the cab, ensuring the truck was a total loss. Millions in cargo destroyed, but Jake was alive. Mission successful, by his standards. "You cost me everything today," El Alcone said, his voice weakening. "You chose the wrong truck to hijack, Jake replied. The first police vehicles appeared at the mouth of the canyon, lights flashing. Jake saved his weapon and raised his hands, knowing the next few hours would involve extensive questioning. He looked down at El Halcón, who was fading fast from blood loss. "Tell me one thing," the cartel leader whispered. "What unit?" Jake hesitated, then answered quietly. 5th Special Forces Group. Operational Detachment Alpha. El Halcón nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "I should have known. Only a ghost would fight like this." As the police surrounded them, weapons drawn and shouting commands, Jake reflected on the irony. He'd left the military to find peace, yet violence seemed to follow him like a shadow. But maybe that was his purpose, to stand between the predators and their prey, to be the ghost that haunts the hunters. The morning sun climbed higher over the canyon, its light filtered through smoke from the burning truck. Another delivery wouldn't make it to Houston on time, but Jake had delivered something else instead, a message that some targets bite back. The desert's backbone had claimed another victim, but this time it was the hunter, not the hunted, who had fallen. The police vehicles screeched to a halt, forming a semicircle around the burning truck and scattered bodies. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, shouting contradictory commands that echoed off the canyon walls. Jake remained perfectly still, hands raised, his military training keeping him calm despite the chaos. He knew how quickly nervous cops could turn a survivor into another casualty. "On your knees! Hands behind your head!" The lead officer's voice cracked with adrenaline. Jake complied smoothly, interlacing his fingers behind his head as he knelt on the hot asphalt. The Sig Sauer lay several feet away where he'd placed it, slide locked back to show it was empty. To his left, El Halcón had collapsed completely, his breathing shallow and labored. The cartel leader's blood was pooling on the road, mixing with oil stains and spent shell casings. "Multiple casualties," another officer called out. "We need medical and fire immediately." The lead officer approached Jake cautiously, service weapon trained center mass. "Don't move! Are you armed?" "Concealed carry permit in my wallet," Jake replied evenly. "Front right pocket. The weapons on the ground to my right, cleared and empty. There's also a ceramic blade in my left boot." The admission of the concealed blade caused several officers to tense. One thing Jake had learned: cops appreciated honesty about weapons more than they feared the weapons themselves. The officer retrieved Jake's wallet, flipping it open to examine his IDs. "Jake Mitchell. Commercial driver's license, Texas CHL and—" The officer's voice changed. "Department of Defense contractor ID? Retired," Jake said. "Just a truck driver now." The officer's partner was checking El Halcón's vitals. "This one's in bad shape. GSWs to shoulder, thigh, possible internal bleeding." He looked up at his partner. "You seeing what I'm seeing? This guy's tactical rig isn't cartel standard. This is military-grade equipment." More sirens approached, fire trucks, ambulances, additional police units. The morning had transformed from quiet desert solitude to a circus of emergency response. Jake watched as firefighters began battling the trailer blaze, knowing his cargo was a total loss. His company wouldn't be happy, but they'd be more concerned about his survival than the electronics. A plain brown Crown Victoria pulled up, and Jake recognized the type immediately: federal agents. 2 men in suits emerged, their bearing screaming law enforcement despite the civilian clothes. They conferred briefly with the local police before approaching. "Mr. Mitchell," the older agent said, displaying his credentials. "Special Agent Harrison, D.A. This is Agent Martinez, FBI. Quite a morning you've had." "Rather stay on schedule," Jake replied dryly. Harrison smiled without humor. 5 dead sicarios, 1 critically wounded cartel lieutenant, and a few million in destroyed cargo. Not to mention enough spent brass to stock a gun range. Care to explain how a truck driver managed all this? Self-defense, Jake said simply. Ahu. Martinez was examining one of the dead gunmen. These boys are Los Zetas. High-end operators. That one. He gestured to El Halcon, who was being loaded onto a gurney. Is Miguel Herrera, former Mexican Special Forces, wanted in 3 countries. And you're telling us you handled them solo? Jake remained silent. His military record would surface soon enough, but he'd learned that volunteering information to federal agents was rarely wise. Harrison's phone buzzed. He stepped away to take the call, his expression changing as he listened. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted from skeptical to intrigued. Interesting, Harrison said. My office just got a call from Langley. Seems you have friends in high places, Mr. Mitchell. Or should I say, Sergeant Major Mitchell, formerly of 5th Special Forces Group? Jake's expression didn't change. That's ancient history. Is it? Martinez had been examining the scene, reconstructing the fight. Because this looks like a textbook special operations ambush response. Flashbangs, smoke deployment, fire discipline, tactical movement. You even managed to use their numbers against them. The paramedics were working on El Halcon, establishing 4 lines and applying pressure bandages. The cartel leader's eyes flickered open briefly, finding Jake. He tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled his words. He'll live, the lead paramedic announced. Barely. Lost a lot of blood, but nothing immediately fatal. Harrison nodded. Good. He's got a lot to answer for. He turned back to Jake. As do you. We'll need a complete statement, but first. He produced a phone from his pocket. Someone wants to speak with you. Jake accepted the phone warily. Mitchell. Jake. The voice was familiar. Colonel Sarah Chin, his former task force commander, now working in some classified capacity at the Pentagon. Making headlines again, I see. Wasn't planned, ma'am. Never is with you. Her tone was businesslike but warm. Listen, the locals don't have the full picture. That cargo you were hauling? It wasn't just commercial electronics. There were classified components mixed in, quantum encryption processors bound for a defense contractor in Houston. That's why the Zetas threw such heavy resources at you. Jake processed this information. I wasn't briefed on any special cargo. You weren't supposed to be. It was a low-vis transport, hiding in plain sight. Someone leaked the route. She paused. Jake, this wasn't random. They knew exactly which truck to hit. The implications were staggering. A security breach, inside information sold to the cartels, and Jake caught in the middle. His mind began connecting dots, seeing patterns. The surveillance was too professional, Jake said. They were waiting at my fuel stop, had the route mapped perfectly. This was orchestrated. Exactly. And now that you've survived, you're a liability to whoever set this up. Chen's voice carried a warning. Watch your 6. This isn't over. Jake handed the phone back to Harrison, who'd been listening intently. The DA agent's expression had shifted from suspicion to concern. Well, Harrison said, this just got a lot more complicated. The fire crew had contained the trailer blaze, but acrid smoke still filled the canyon. Crime scene technicians were arriving, beginning the meticulous process of documenting the battle. Shell casings were marked, photographs taken, measurements recorded. Jake watched them work, noting how they were already focusing on specific areas. Someone had directed them to look for particular evidence. We need to get you somewhere secure, Martinez said. If Colonel Chen's right about the leak, Jake's instincts triggered a heartbeat before his conscious mind registered the threat. A glint of sunlight on glass from the canyon rim above, the subtle shift in air pressure that preceded a rifle shot. He was already moving, tackling Martinez to the ground as the first bullet cracked past. Sniper! Jake shouted. Canyon rim, 10 o'clock high! Chaos erupted again. Officers scrambled for cover as more shots rang out. The sniper was good, professional, patient, picking targets carefully. 2 officers went down before the rest found adequate cover. Jake rolled behind a police cruiser, pulling Martinez with him. Harrison had taken cover behind another vehicle, already on his radio calling for backup. The sniper's position gave him command of the entire canyon floor, a perfect kill zone. Where? Martinez gasped, his suit now covered in dust. Jake risked a quick look, his trained eye analyzing angles. Halfway up the eastern wall. Using that rock outcropping for cover. Probably has a spot or two. Another shot sparked off the cruiser's hood. The sniper was trying to pin them down, control their movement. Standard tactics, which meant Jake could predict his patterns. I need a rifle, Jake said to Martinez. Something with reach. The agent looked at him incredulously. You're not serious. That sniper's here to clean up loose ends, Jake replied grimly. Starting with me and probably El Alcon. We don't stop him, we're all dead. Harrison had crawled over to join them. State police have a tactical unit 20 minutes out. We don't have 20 minutes. Jake had spotted what he needed. One of the dead sicarios had been carrying a scoped M4. The weapon lay 15 feet away, partially under an SUV. Cover me. Before either agent could protest, Jake was moving. He used the vehicles for concealment, timing his movements between the sniper's shots. The shooter was methodical, maintaining a steady rate of fire to keep everyone's heads down. Jake reached the M4, quickly checking its condition. The scope was a decent ACOG, the magazine still had rounds, and the weapon appeared undamaged. He belly-crawled back to better cover, mind already calculating wind speed, elevation, and bullet drop. You can't be serious, Harrison said as Jake began setting up his position. That's got to be 600 yards uphill, with iron sights. ACOG, Jake corrected, settling into a stable shooting position. And it's closer to 750. He began controlling his breathing, letting his heart rate slow. The scope filled with the canyon wall, and Jake began searching for his target. There, a barely visible disturbance in the rocks, the hint of a rifle barrel. The sniper was well concealed, but not invisible to someone who knew what to look for. The mathematics of long-range shooting flowed through Jake's mind. Wind was gusting at maybe 8 miles per hour from the southwest. The elevation difference would affect bullet trajectory. The M4's 5.56 mm round would lose energy quickly at this range. Another shot from the sniper struck a fire truck's windshield. Jake noted the impact point, calculating the shooter's position more precisely. He made minute adjustments to his aim, factoring in everything from barrel harmonics to the Coriolis effect. Spotting, Jake murmured, mostly to himself. The first shot would likely miss, but it would tell him exactly how much to correct. He squeezed the trigger smoothly. The shot impacted low and left, striking the rock face. Jake saw the puff of dust, made his corrections, and fired again. Closer, but still not perfect. The sniper, realizing he was taking return fire, shifted positions slightly. A mistake. The movement revealed more of his silhouette. Jake's third shot was dead on. Through the scope, he saw the sniper jerk backward, his rifle tumbling into the canyon. A second figure, the spotter, briefly appeared, then vanished into the rocks. No follow-up shots came. Target down, Jake reported, maintaining his aim in case the spotter tried to recover the sniper's weapon. The canyon fell eerily quiet except for the crackle of radio traffic and the moans of the wounded. Emergency responders began moving again, tending to casualties. Harrison and Martinez looked at Jake with newfound respect tinged with wariness. 700 yards? Martinez said slowly. Uphill. With a borrowed rifle you've never zeroed. Lucky shot. Jake deflected, setting the M4 aside. Right. Harrison was already on his phone. We need to get you into protective custody. This confirms it. Someone wants you silenced. As if to emphasize the point, Jake's personal cell phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, unknown number, but the area code was familiar, Washington, D.C. Mitchell. He answered cautiously. Mr. Mitchell, this is Deputy Director Williams, Defense Intelligence Agency. The voice was crisp, professional. We've been monitoring the situation. A vehicle is en route to extract you. You'll be debriefed at a secure location. Jake's internal alarms were ringing. Something about this felt wrong. The timing, the approach, the lack of proper authentication protocols. His old unit had specific code phrases for situations like this, and Williams hadn't used any of them. I appreciate the offer, Jake said carefully, but I'm in good hands with the DA and FBI. A pause. Then Williams' voice hardened slightly. This isn't a request, Sergeant Major. National security is at stake. Jake ended the call and immediately turned to Harrison. We need to move. Now. Someone's coming, and they're not friendly. The agents didn't question his judgment. They'd seen enough to trust his instincts. Within minutes they had Jake in an unmarked car, leaving the scene via a little-used service road. As they crested the canyon rim, Jake spotted a convoy of black SUVs approaching from the main highway. The extraction team. Federal plates, Martinez observed. But something's off about them. Private military contractors, Jake said. Probably working for whoever orchestrated this whole thing. They drove in tense silence for several miles before Harrison spoke. So what are we dealing with here? Cartel infiltration of defense contractors? Corporate espionage? Bigger, Jake replied. Those quantum processors Chen mentioned? They're next-generation encryption tech. In the wrong hands, they could compromise every secure communications system we have. Someone's playing a very dangerous game. His phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unlisted number. You can't run forever, Ghost. Jake showed the message to the agents. They know my old call sign. This is definitely an inside job. The car sped through the desert, raising a rooster tail of dust. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering, a rare sight in this arid landscape. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the morning's violence had been just the opening move in a much larger conflict. Where are we headed? He asked. Safe house in Tucson, Harrison replied. Off the books, known only to a handful of people. Jake nodded, but his mind was already working through possibilities. The sniper's appearance meant the enemy had significant resources and reach. The fake DI call suggested high-level infiltration. And the quantum processors implied stakes that went far beyond simple cartel operations. His phone buzzed one more time. This message was different, a coded string of numbers that Jake recognized immediately. It was from Chen, using old task force encryption. Trust no one. Mole confirmed at highest levels. Stay dark. Jake deleted the message and removed his phone's battery. Change of plans? He said to the agents. That safe house is probably compromised. I know somewhere better. Where? Martinez asked. Ghost town called Salvation. 60 miles from here. My unit used it for training exercises. Officially, it doesn't exist. Harrison and Martinez exchanged glances. They were federal agents, used to being in control. Now they were relying on a truck driver who fought like special forces and received encrypted messages from Pentagon officials. All right, Harrison said finally. We play it your way. But you better be right about this. Jake watched the desert roll by, his mind cataloging the day's events. What had started as a simple hijacking had revealed a conspiracy that reached from Mexican cartels to Washington's corridors of power. The quantum processors were the key. Someone was willing to kill to obtain them, and now they were willing to kill to cover up the attempt. The storm clouds were moving faster now, unusual for the season. Lightning flickered in their depths, and the wind was picking up.